Well, hello again and welcome to the Godwit podcast for another week. My name is Paul Smith.
And I'm David Kowalik, and this week we're getting to the pointy end of the gospel story. So there's going to be some low-level violence in this next couple of sessions, so prepare yourself. I think we're going to have to put a rating on this, probably MA or something like that.
Well, funnily enough, one of our videos when I was talking about the Garden of Eden, and I mentioned Adam and Eve having a nudist colony. Apparently, YouTube listens.
Oh, really?
Listens on what you're saying, and that video has come up in searches for nudists.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, it's good to know we're meeting everyone's needs here.
Yeah. Maybe we do have to put a. Now that I've said nudist again multiple times in this episode, it would definitely need an MA rating, I think. Yeah,
it'd be funny if we start getting like 3,000 views in the first week. We'll know that we're hitting the right audience. Yeah. Okay. So
what are we talking about?
Well, I think you're going to start us off on talking about the trial of Jesus.
That's right. We are up to Jesus' trial and execution. And what I really want to point out is that, well, really, this whole series we've done on the gospel is looking at how the most common contemporary gospel is really kind of a bit problematic in a number of ways, but also just misses the mark really quite a lot with the idea that the central idea of Christianity is Jesus' death for sins. And again, Jesus' death for sins does factor into the whole story, but it's not the major focus, and it's certainly not the major focus, not even close to being the major focus in all the gospel accounts.
Yeah.
So when we get to Jesus' trial and execution, and I think I mentioned in a previous episode that I've heard people describe the gospel accounts as passion narratives with extended introductions. It's all about the passion, and then in that telling as well, the passion is all about Jesus dying for sins. But we just don't see that theme coming out in the Gospels.
No.
There's other places in the New Testament that address that idea, but not in the Gospels.
No.
There's something else that keeps coming out. And guess what? It's the same thing that keeps coming out in this entire series.
That's right, yeah.
everywhere we look.
Yeah.
In whether it's Acts, whether it's the Old Testament story, whether it's the beginning, the middle, or the end of the gospel.
That's right.
The same thing that comes out all the way through the scriptures on what the gospel is the kingdom of God and Jesus as king.
Yeah.
And what comes out in the stories of Jesus' trial and execution, they really focus on his identity, who he is. So we're going to have a look at that in this episode.
In fact, you could actually say the reason Jesus ended up getting crucified, the kind of the thing that really sealed his fate, was the fact that he claimed to be the Son of God. They had false witnesses in there, but once he admitted that he was in fact the Messiah, they went, we don't need these false witnesses anymore. You guys can go home. Jesus has sealed his own fate by saying that he's the Son of God.
So I'd really encourage you to read for yourself, go into the Gospels. They have, what we're looking at, the stories are mostly the same all the way through, with slight variations, but everything's covered in Matthew, Mark and Luke, and a lot of similarities in John, although a few differences there. But go and read for yourself and you'll see. See if you can find the storyline of Jesus dying for sins as a main theme in these stories, and you'll find that you won't. But instead you'll find that Jesus' identity as the Messiah, the Son of God, the Son of Man, is all the way through these accounts. And if we're wrong, which we're not, but if we're wrong, you can feel free to let us know in the comments or send us an angry email, even though we haven't shared our email address.
But it is really interesting, I reckon, that you sort of have a bias a certain way. I was brought up with penal substitution as being the biggie. That's what the whole Jesus dying on the cross thing is about. Is all about wiping out our sins and bringing forgiveness. Now, again, we say, yes, that does happen downstream, But the big thing in the crucifixion and, of course, the resurrection is the identity of Jesus as Messiah. And now that I've got my eyes open to that, I can see it not only there but everywhere. And it's funny, I think, how is it that I missed that? I don't know if you've ever bought a new car. You buy a new kind of a car.
I've never bought a new car.
No, okay, me neither, but a new kind of a car. Yeah. So a new second-hand, new to me second-hand car. The moment you buy that car, you start noticing it everywhere and you think, how did I not see this car before? It's like it's everywhere. And before you had that car, you could only see what you're conditioned to see. And there is a theory about being able to see something. I've forgotten the name of the theory, but once you keep on going over the same thing again and again and again, eventually you start to see this everywhere you look. And now that I've come to understand the gospel is all about the kingdom of God and Jesus as Messiah, I'm now seeing it absolutely everywhere I read the scriptures. Doesn't matter Old or New Testament, it's everywhere.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
probably because
it is there. I mean, that's part of it is there. Yeah. And a lot of what I thought was the big picture. So I can honestly say there are big slabs of scripture which I rarely have referred to and didn't seem all that important or relevant. I can't believe I'm saying that in public, but because it didn't fit with the picture of the atonement and everything that I was brought up with. Now I've come to realise maybe I just had my focus in the wrong place. So,
well, I found for myself, once I started preaching or leading Bible studies and things like that, then I had all these ideas that I was conditioned with, and then when I had to go teach them or preach on them from the scriptures, I couldn't find scriptural evidence to back up what I wanted to say. Which I have mentioned in a previous episode, I think. That's what got me started on this whole rediscovery of the gospel, was doing that with Acts. I wanted to look at in Acts how the first apostles, how the first church did evangelism, thinking I had the Evangelion, the evangelistic message down, but then I just couldn't find that message in Acts. And then if we do the same thing with the Gospels, you won't find that message in the Gospels either.
Yeah, I mean, I've been looking for the sinner's prayer, can't find it. It's just not there. So what are you going to do?
not use the sinner's prayer.
Yeah, maybe there's something else going on.
I guess I always used to, if you've seen Karate Kid, you know how he has Mr. Miyagi gets Daniel-san to do that painting of the fence and wax in the car, wax on, wax off, and he's like, why am I doing these jobs? This is kind of dumb. I want to learn karate. And it turns out he was, Miyagi's a martial arts teaching guru, and he was training his arms and whatever. Every time things don't line up, or not every time anymore, when I was younger, I would just assume, well, I can't see it, kind of like Daniel-san. I can't see what's going on, but all the smart people can. And they know that this is all about Jesus' death for sins. So even though I don't see it in there, it still must be there. I just don't. I'm not smart enough. As I've got older and
have you got smarter?
Not that I've got smarter. I've got wiser to the fact that there aren't as many smart people as I thought there was. And so now I don't take for granted what I'm told, and I just try and look with more open eyes at.
Well, at least half of all people are below average intelligence, so I've understood.
Yeah. I mean, it has to work like that statistically, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
With average.
Yeah, and interestingly, as my wife would point out, half of all people are men. Anyway, we better get on with this.
So in Matthew 26, which is just before Matthew's account of the Lord's Supper, from verse 1, it says, when Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, as you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. So Jesus said a number of times in his ministry to his disciples along the way, he gave them hints that he was going to be killed. And a number of times in the gospel accounts, he would say the Son of Man is going to be handed over to sinful men, who is going to suffer and die and be raised on the third day. And here, just before the Last Supper, he says it again, but he says the Son of Man is going to be handed over to be crucified.
Mm.
And all through the following accounts of Jesus' trial and execution, he references himself as the Son of Man, which we'll see in a little bit. But also, actually, all through his ministry, his favourite title for himself was the Son of Man. Where does that? What's the?
From Daniel chapter 7, verse 13, it says, "One like the Son of Man being brought before the Ancient of Days."
Do you want to read the passage?
Yeah. So Daniel 7 and verse 13 is probably the most important reference to the Son of Man in the Old Testament, at least, when it says, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days, and he was led into his presence, and he was given authority, glory, sovereign power, and all nations of peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." Now, those words at the end there, we've already seen that numerous times in the prophecies of Isaiah and right back in the book of Genesis, talking about this everlasting kingdom. And that's all in reference to this one who is like the Son of Man being glorified by God. I think that has a lot to do with the rapture and everything, which we'll get onto another time. But he's being lifted up and held up and put forward to the world as the true Messiah, the true King of the world.
Yeah. And it's that Jesus is referencing, that passage from Daniel, when he refers to himself as the Son of Man. I think I've mentioned this before, but another way of translating the Son of Man is the human one.
Yeah.
Because the Son of just means you're associating with,
Well, in the same way, we go back to the genealogy in Luke, and it says that Adam was the son of God, that he represented the purposes of God as a son of God, not just that he was from the family of God. It wasn't really trying to indicate that, but it was really saying Adam came in the likeness of God to do the will of God on earth. And as we've seen in our previous episodes, Adam failed to do that. Now Jesus is coming as the true Son of Man and Son of God to do and fulfill the purposes that human beings were first created for. So he's stepping into that place and that role of the true man and of the true Son of God, the true Son of Man, both at the same time, to redo the Adam project.
Yeah, and if you look back just before that verse in Daniel 7, at the preceding passage, it's a scene of like a heavenly council scene where all these thrones are brought out for supposedly celestial beings, including the Ancient of Days. But then, surprise, one like a Son of Man comes in on the clouds and takes a seat right next to the Ancient of Days and is given all authority, rule, and power and dominion.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Which in that scene is very surprising. But that's how Jesus refers to himself, as the Son of Man.
And we've got to say also, the Jews had an understanding of this idea of the Son of Man based on Daniel 7, and remembering that Daniel was kind of like the favourite prophecy in the time of Christ. So they're all looking for the Son of Man to come. And when Jesus is saying the Son of Man is going to be handed over to the chief priests and the elders and they're going to be put to death, I think we know for sure that the disciples didn't believe that. They thought, please. Sure, you get handed over, but you're going to teach these guys a lesson. I mean, you're the Son of Man, you're the Messiah. So, sure, you might get handed over, but it's not going to go the way they think it's going to go. That's what I think they were thinking in their head. Yeah. Anyway.
So then I just want to quickly go through some of the scenes here in Jesus' trial and execution, and point out the references to Jesus and who he is, because they're all the way through. So in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus appears before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, as part of his trial, and some witnesses come forward, false witnesses, to try and bring allegations against him, and he doesn't really say anything through the whole process until, from verse 63, The high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, yes, it is as you say.
What a thing to say.
Yeah. But he doesn't stop there.
No.
I mean, that's a big claim in
Yeah.
itself.
Mm.
Yes, I am the Christ.
Mm.
But he goes on to say, but I say to all of you, in the future you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven.
Yeah. Well, that's obviously a reference to what we just read out before. And it's such a huge claim. I mean, he really got himself crucified at that point, I think.
Yeah. Well, if I continue reading, it says, Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? He is worthy of death, they answered.
Yeah.
Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, Prophesy to us, Christ, who hit you?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
I mean, these guys would have known the Daniel 7 and the reference to the Son of Man, who is given rule and dominion and an everlasting throne.
Yeah. So
And Jesus is saying, that's me.
Yeah. I mean, what a thing to say. He's really saying, I'm king of the world
Yeah.
at his trial. And one day you're going to bow down and worship me virtually. I mean, you can imagine the false witnesses were like, yeah, we don't need you guys anymore. You're just get out of here. He's incriminated himself.
Yeah.
So, yeah, amazing. But what a reference. I mean, that's Jesus' own self-reference, his own self-designation. I am the Messiah. I'm king of the world.
Yeah.
And my kingdom will be forever and ever. And it will be over all people.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then moving on into chapter 27, Jesus appears before Pilate, who is the Roman governor. What is he?
Yeah, it was like he's more than just a governor. He's like the representative. I guess we would call him a governor, I guess. But he's more than that. He's got higher authority than that, yeah.
Yeah, so in verse 11 it says, Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor. Oh, there we go.
Boom, let's go back.
And the governor asked him, Are you the king of the Jews? Yes, it is as you say,
Yeah.
Jesus replied.
Yeah, and to say that he's the king of the Jews implies that what he's really saying is he's the Messiah.
He's the Messiah. Yeah.
That's right, yeah. And I think we have to also mention that same conversation that Jesus has in John chapter 18, where he's with Pilate in John chapter 18. In John chapter 18, the passage starts in verse 28, and we know that Jesus was with Pilate in private too, which is interesting. And he was having a conversation with Pilate, and they have an interesting sort of tete-a-tete, backwards and forwards. And then Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And then verse 34 in chapter 18 says, "Is that your own idea," Jesus asked, "or did others talk about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is this that you have done?" And Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." And a lot of Christians, I think, misunderstand this passage as if Jesus is saying, I have a heavenly kingdom and it's kind of up there in the sky. But I don't believe Jesus is saying that at all. What he's really saying is my kingdom doesn't come out of the earth or come out of the political systems that we're so used to. It doesn't come from the left, doesn't come from the right of politics. It's not a centrist thing. And you can't even put the kingdom of God on a spectrum of different kinds of political systems. You can't say it's kind of down the left end of the spectrum, or it's kind of down the right end, as much as people seem to try to sign Jesus up for their right or left politics. It's coming from completely another place, coming down from above, and it's being inserted into the earth, but it's still a kingdom for the earth and for all the people. And it is a real kingdom in real time, not just up there in heaven, but here on earth. It's just that the place it comes from is from above, but it's going to change everything here on earth. And then Jesus goes on to say, Pilate says, "So you are a king then?" said Pilate. And Jesus answered, "You say I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." And so, I mean, Jesus is making these huge claims.
Yeah.
And he's not just saying, I'm one of many kings, or I'm a king amongst kings. He's saying he's the King of kings. He's the Lord of lords. And I mean, he's saying that to someone who represents a king and who has, the authority of the emperor in his hands. And he's telling him, well, I'm above you, which is, and he's a prisoner. What a thing to say.
Yeah.
All right, so it's interesting that the story is all about who Jesus is and what his claims were, and he's getting put to death because he claims to be the Son of God. He's not getting put to death, ostensibly because he's trying to become the scapegoat for sin for the rest of the world. Even though that does actually happen in all of this, he is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. But that's not the center of this story, is it?
No.
And so then the fact that he goes to death, even there, even the fact that he's being condemned to death, he's being condemned to death for political reasons. He's become an enemy of the state in terms of the Roman Empire. He's become an enemy of the religious system, or at least for the elites of the religious system who are controlling things. And the way they control people is death. And couldn't it be that Jesus went into death to undo the biggest cudgel that the empires and the religious systems of this world use to hold people in control, which is death? And so Jesus takes on their greatest power and undoes it from inside out, which we'll get onto when we talk about the crucifixion. But I think that's implied in what's going on here in his talk with Pilate and in the accusations of the high priest.
I mean, the disciples, everyone other than Jesus in this story has no idea what's going on.
No. In fact, I think it says in Corinthians, if the rulers of this world had known who they were crucifying, they would never known what was going to happen when they crucified him, they would never have gone through with it.
No. I mean, we're going to get on to very soon discussions on Jesus' death, why it happened, what it achieved.
Yeah.
And there's a whole mixed bag of stuff. There's a number of things that occurred. But I'll say even from here that I think the way the story is told in the Gospels and in Acts and through the Old Testament prophets and basically through the whole Bible, I think the main emphasis on why Jesus died was to be resurrected.
Yeah.
Because he went in going into death. We mentioned from Hebrews in a previous episode that he had to become like us to then go into death, to destroy death.
To destroy the power.
To destroy,
the power that the devil wields, which is death.
Yeah.
And then those who are serving the evil one, the empire, the corrupt religious systems, they are wielding that power, if you like, under the control of a satanic influence. And Jesus is pulling the rug out from underneath of all that.
And he does it by going into it.
Yeah.
He takes the full brunt of, everything, the full focus of just sinfulness in the world, expressing itself in the degradation of humanity, of humans. Like he was just degraded and dehumanized, really, in his execution.
Yeah.
Violently killed, shamed. He took on shame and violence and degradation and dehumanization and ultimately death. Experienced all those things, and he actually conquered them by experiencing them and raising into new life.
Yeah, I think you get a little bit of a picture of that kind of thing, say, at the end of the first Matrix movie, where you see the protagonist in that has to absorb all of the power of the agents into himself, but there's something inside of him which is stronger than the violence and the power of the system, and therefore he overcomes the system by overcoming the pointy end of their power being used to try to push him down.
Yeah.
So, and there's mysteries there which no one understands. I don't know any theologian who fully gets how it is that Jesus has overcome death. But what we can say is that Jesus had to go right into the crucible of violence and the power of the system in order to undo it from inside out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is an amazing story seen from a messianic point of view. Yeah.
And again, what you won't find in this story is an emphasis on death for sins.
Yeah.
Even though that later Christian theologians, and when I say later, I mean contemporaries of Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Well, I like to say that all of the stuff, say, in Romans and Galatians is really explaining how the gospel works rather than being the gospel. So most of the letter or the first 8 chapters of Romans, for instance, is mainly about how the gospel has its effect upon us rather than being the gospel. So it's kind of like downstream from the gospel. Paul is opening it all up and using his brilliant mind to explain the hows and whens of how the gospel actually has its effect upon us. But the gospel itself is a proclamation of what was done and who it is that's at the centre of it. And of course, the who is Jesus. And what he's done is become one of us, he's become the Son of Man, lived amongst us and taken on death and then defeated it in his resurrection. So it's a great story.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And then if we continue on with the story of Jesus before Pilate, I'm not going to read the whole thing out, but he keeps referring to Jesus as the Christ. So when there's the part where he presents Jesus and Barabbas and says, because it's a feast and it's a special Passover, tradition says I can release a prisoner to you. Do you want Jesus? But he says, Jesus, who is called Christ, or Barabbas. And he gives him that name multiple times. Matthew chapter 7, verse 17. When the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, which one do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?
Yeah.
Again, down in verse 22, what shall I do then with Jesus, who is called Christ?
Yeah. It's just a little interesting sidelight there too, is that Barabbas, his name means son of the Father, and people try to draw some kind of parallel between Jesus being the son of, God the Father, but it's nothing like that. It just means his famous father. Barabbas had a famous father, and he wasn't famous enough in his own right to have his own name. Later, he did become really famous and got his own name, but up until then, he was known by his father, and he was trying to be a Messiah-type figure himself. And the reason that Barabbas was getting murdered was not because he was just some common thief. He, alongside of Jesus, was going to be put to death because he was a threat to the system. And so
Because he led a rebellion.
He led a rebellion, and he had messianic aspirations. So if you like, there's two kind of contenders for the throne here. They're both kind of Christ figures, or both kind of leaders of a rebellion against Rome, but one of them's doing it with violence and power, just ordinary human power. But Jesus has a kingdom that comes from above, and he's doing it in a completely different way, and lowly and humble and so on. Yeah, which is just a little interesting.
And Jesus' accusers when they bring accusations to Pilate as a Roman governor, try and use that picture for Jesus.
Yeah.
They say, this guy claims to be a king.
Yeah.
Which is a threat to Caesar.
Yeah.
We only have one king, Caesar.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, how's that for the Jews, capitulating to...
Yeah, giving away to the system.
Yeah. Their whole religion is based on having, loyalty to Yahweh only.
Yeah.
But as soon as it suits them, no, we have no king but Caesar.
Yeah. Well,
what sellouts?
Exactly. I mean, part of the interesting story leading up to this, of course, is shortly before this, Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead, and no one questioned the fact that Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. People never went, that didn't happen. In fact, the Pharisees and the Sadducees actually did believe that he'd done that. And so what did they do? they got together and they plotted how they're going to kill Jesus, murder Jesus, and also murder Lazarus. He was having a rough week. Imagine if he did get murdered, dead, raised, dead again, all in 1 week. It would have been pretty ordinary. But it's interesting. They didn't call in question the fact of the raising of Lazarus from the dead. What they did with that information was plot to have Jesus killed. So they must have kind of suspected, raising Lazarus from the dead kind of makes me think he could be the Messiah. What do you reckon? Something like that. Yeah. And yet they were so sold out and so captured by the system that they had to get rid of Jesus, because if they didn't, he could actually upset things so much that the Romans might come in and pull the place down and, destroy the temple and all that, which, of course, they did 40 years later. But anyway, that's just another interesting side to that story. So, and again, it's what you've been saying all along. This story is about who Jesus is. He's the Messiah. That's the big sticking point of this story.
Yeah. And so then moving on to when Pilate's soldiers take Jesus, from verse 28, Matthew 27, they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. Mm-hmm. Scarlet, the whole point of the robe. In John, I think it says that they put a purple robe on him.
Yeah.
But the point of a robe is to give him kind of a regal air. Yeah. And then twisted together a crown of thorns. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's pretty obvious what that's all about.
Yeah.
They're just mocking him as a king.
Yeah.
Put a robe on him, twist together a crown of thorns, put it on his head, put a staff in his right hand and knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said.
But weirdly, that actually is Jesus' crown. They're mocking him with that crown, but Jesus, I think, is actually wearing that crown, and it really is his crown, the crown of thorns. And that bloodied robe with spit on it really is his robe, and that splintery old stick really is his scepter, and he's a crucified Messiah, a dying Messiah. It's amazing. He turns the whole thing upside down, and they're mocking him, but I believe Jesus is actually taking that on board and actually claiming that as his real crown.
Yeah.
So I find that actually moves me to tears, that does. So, yeah.
Well, one of the things that I've kind of mentioned this a bit before, but one of the things that in the way that the modern gospel falls really short, and particularly how it leads to evangelism, is that we have this picture of, and this is getting kind of a reformed influence has led more towards this way, but this idea of the total depravity of humanity.
Yeah.
And so, and God's just angry with everybody and is just going to come in judgment and wipe everyone out unless he gets appeased by a good enough sacrifice.
Yeah.
That's the only way. Otherwise, God just is like so angry with all of humanity.
Yeah.
And so evangelism tends to be centered around convincing people that they're really rotten sinners and have no hope of getting into heaven and need to rely on a substitutionary death that's, in their place that's better.
Yeah.
What gets really missed by that is that God actually has compassion on a broken and oppressed people.
Yeah.
So yes, there's the issue of sin, but Jesus comes as king to, we've talked before about how Jesus, when he begins his ministry, quotes from Isaiah 61 and says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to bind up the brokenhearted, to release the captives, to proclaim freedom of darkness for the prisoner."
Yeah.
Right? So he comes to a broken and oppressed humanity. Like, he doesn't just see the whole world as, everyone's just rotten. And, I'll give them one more chance by, paying a penalty for them. A big part of his mission is, so what we see here, what you're talking about, is Jesus comes as our king, as our representative, by being one of us and experiencing the horror to its fullest extent
Yep.
of what so many humans that have been enslaved by sin and death and corrupt spiritual powers experience as their lives, which even now is a good portion of the globe.
Yeah.
People that are just oppressed by the darkness of the world. And Jesus goes and experiences that. And so when has the crown of thorns, and when he's beaten and he's spit upon and has his beard pulled out, he's the king for the broken people.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's just an amazing that Jesus has to actually walk. It's almost like Jesus has to go into the burning building of our brokenness in order to save us from it. And in the process, he gets burnt without being consumed by the fire completely. Or as it's put elsewhere, Jesus, he dies, but he doesn't actually go to corruption. And you can also say that Jesus is tempted without actually giving way to the temptation, and he experiences despair without giving up hope. So he has to go through all of those things. He has to go right down to the bottom of the pit and experience everything that we go through in order to undo the power behind those things.
Yeah.
He has to become those things in order that we can be released from it. And yes, we have to say that there is, an element in which he also relieves us from God's righteous anger against sin, but that's a portion of the story, not the big story.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not even sure how to put that into words, but I know that the story I read now with Kingdom of God eyes is one about Jesus becoming the true man for all of humanity, the true Israelite for all of Israel, and then through Israel to save the world. So the salvation story is a story about the righteous king becoming the king for all humanity, not just someone who pays the sin penalty. Even if that's an element of the story, that's not the big end of the story. That's just one page in the book. But the book is Jesus is the true man, the true king, and he represents both God and humanity in his life. And so it's much bigger than we've been led to believe, I think.
Yeah. All right. So I did say at the start that we were going to talk about Jesus' trial and execution. We haven't got to his execution.
Yeah.
Because we really just got caught up talking about some other stuff along the way. So that'll be next episode. But yeah, just to wrap up this one, you can see just in what we've talked about in Jesus, just the trial stage, that his identity as the Son of Man, as the Christ, as the Son of God, as the Messiah is the theme. And what we've been talking about from previous episodes, particularly we brought it out in Jesus' baptism and temptation in that episode, that when Jesus began his ministry, he was walking the journey of humanity. And we see that again here in Jesus' trial and execution, that even in this part, he's walking the journey of humanity by going into the deepest, darkest places of the human story and experiencing brutality and dehumanization and shame. And it's that, that makes him our king, not just that. But because he became like one of us in the worst way, is one of the things that makes him such a great representative of humanity. But the story doesn't end there; it continues.
It does. Yeah.
So thanks for watching and listening to this episode, and we'll be with you again shortly discussing Jesus' execution.
Okay. Cheers.